insofar in that. Thank you. That you now fully grasp, having had anywhere from 47 to 48 hours to ponder the matter, I'm sure that all of you fully see that distinct, compact possibility that we were talking about last time, wherein that what a thing is not might be its ideal state. Everyone remembers that. I'm sure that you've thought about nothing but that. So, since that is now fully digested, see if you can connect that with the following. And that is that anything that must be explained will never be understood. For those that are weak of heart, or those of you that do not have your high school equivalency diploma yet, I could say that anything that must be explained will never be understood, comma, parentheses, not at least in the way in which it was explained. Oh, so you won't know why, all right. At least not in the way in which it was explained, because that's the very reason that it was explained that way, was to keep it from being understood. That's the purpose. Sort of like so that you won't submit to a real explanation. So that you would not fall for any expansive story beyond the first one. Therefore, things are explained. That, as you might suspect, I was going to say is again part of the functions and purposes of the human intellect at this level, is to explain things. And this is beyond the simplistic, although quite real and necessary level, that the intellect must explain things to keep up a kind of three-dimensional linearity, wherein we seem to have some impact on the out there. Technology, for instance. The way that we have apparently turned primary necessities, food, sex, shelter, into secondary activities, and therefore it is now not merely couples here and there engaging in doing it. Now there are whole industries engaged on the basis of doing it, and an individual does not go off by himself in the woods and suck on bark and chew leaves. There are now whole industries. I guess it's one of the probably greatest in the top 2 or 3 industries on this planet is what? Food. Wherein you can go out by yourself, assuming you have a taste for such, and just out in private eat leaves and nuts. But it has turned into a gigantic secondary activity, which is part of the general overall expansion of life. But beyond all of that is what I'm trying to get you to see tonight, that part of the purpose, beyond all of that, of the human intellect being, and the human intellect being verbal, and the human intellect being verbal, being inclined to be vociferous, and the human intellect being inclined to be vociferous and verbal, is continually involved with explaining things. Explaining itself, explaining your behavior, explaining why your relatives are so ugly, explaining why your progenitors were not as rich as they should have been, explaining why life operates as it does. But behind this expansion, behind these explanations, I'm suggesting to you is the attempt to keep them from being in a quite more complex way, to keep the things that are being explained from being what? You're right, understood. That is the purpose. That is why I started out saying that those things that must be explained will never be understood. At the ordinary level, this is no consequence, and as always, it's good to be consistent. As always, at the ordinary level, this is ridiculous, to be charitable about it. Thank you. Above the ordinary level, it has validity to consider that everything that must be explained, everything that you find in any attempt to get above the gravitational hold of ordinary intelligence, anything that must be explained, whether you thought was coming from someone else or whether you apparently that is your old intelligence, which is the only one that would do it, of talking to yourself to explain to yourself, well, I know what's happening with this. I know why people act like that. Sure. Whatever the explanation was, if it had to be explained to you, that is, all right, you want me to be crude? If you had to tell yourself, now you've got to tell yourself something. If you listen to yourself, got to tell yourself something. That is, if you listen to the explanation, you'll never understand it. Think about it. We've had at least, in this part of life's body on the planet, 5,000 to 6,000 years of recorded history, and everyone has sit around and tried to think. They have tried to explain what's going on. Has anyone succeeded? No need to hold up the taping here. The answer is no. No ordinary person has ever understood. Does that not give you some cause to consider that this insanity might not be as insane as first thought? People are made to explain things to each other, to themselves. It's all the same. But those kinds of things, everything that must be explained from a more complex level, you may rest assured those things that must be explained will never be understood. If that were not the case, then everything that the first story that you ever received about everything, your first impression, your first thought about everything would have been it. You would have went, or you would have gone, I guess according to where you're from, that you wondered, why did that person insult me? And you thought, well, it's because I have straight hair. It's because I'm poor. It's because I have a big nose. Whatever it was, and as soon as you say it, you'd go, oh, okay. And you would have understood it. I remind you that I was asking if you could connect this with the area that we were mapping out last time we were taping, the distinct possibility that the condition, the state that a thing is not, may be its ideal condition. So what are the ideal explanations in life? Don't take my word for it. No need to. You got history. You got your own nervous system. What are the ideal conditions of explanations? Those that don't explain anything. Those that do not make you personally understand and go, oh, yeah. That, I suggest, might be the ideal condition of explanations. Would that not, again, explain, I won't say a lot because I hate to repeat myself, wouldn't that explain a little bit? A little bit about a lot of things. Wouldn't that explain what education's about? Wouldn't that explain what social criticism is about? Wouldn't that explain why they cannot cure crime? Nor psoriasis, for that matter. Which I guess you could look at as being a kind of flaking and scaling about on the skin of society. I don't know why you would want to, but you could. While we're doing our weekend wrap-ups, for you people getting this on tape, this is the end of the week. As if that mattered. But see if you could connect the dots between such things as we were just discussing, the general topic of the possibility that what a thing is not might be its ideal state. Could you connect that with also what we were talking about last time we were taping? Words themselves, the energy packets of words, and something we've been discussing off and on again, freedom. The idea of free will and what purpose it's serving. All right, here we are. Are you ready? What life has made men think about as being freedom of will, free will, which is at the heart of being alive, being intellectually aware, being able to survive at the ordinary level day by day, being able to take first stories, which do not mean anything, but which obviously explain everything, except simultaneously do not mean anything, being able to walk around, try and look reasonably intelligent, speak when you have to while having some passing awareness that I'm about to speak faster than I can even think, and I got no idea what I'm about to say, and I'm here among my betters, my employers, bankers, people that could do me bodily harm, and my mouth, my tongue, and my lips are just about to dive right off the edge into the pool, and I got no idea whether they can swim or not, but I'm going to do it. I can't help myself. All of such matters as that is based on the question of freedom of will, although you or anybody else may not go around all the time thinking about does freedom of will exist and all that. The reality of it, the energy of it, is always, I guess as that great philosopher Jimmy Webb said, on your mind. You just don't know it. Now my question, is this continuing background noise an idea of freedom of will? Would it be the same thing? Could it be called free choice? If I changed it and called it free choice, is that the same thing as freedom of will or free will? Sounds sort of like it, right? But it's got to be a trick or I wouldn't be going through all this. Nope, no trick. It would be. All right, next. Believe it or not, I'm going to try to drag your attention somewhere. But back to my opening question. Freedom of will, free will. If we called it free choice, would it be the same thing, or would anything have shifted? Would it be free choice? Now let's assume you had the ability to make free choice. Is it still free choice if you're only presented with one choice? For those of you who didn't laugh, it wasn't all that tricky. Assume that there is an ability in life that just every ordinary person has the ability to freely choose what they want in certain areas, in any specific area. That let's assume you've got the ability to freely choose, except unbeknownst to you, you're only given one choice. That is, let's say you have the ability, that it's just inherent, to freely choose any kind, any brand, any soap you want. Except it turns out that there's only one brand of soap, one size, one scent, and that's all there is, except you have the freedom, you have the ability to freely choose. Maybe I should remind you that this is still groundwork for my upcoming decade attempted force feeding and gift to some of you of my new creation myth. Because this is getting right at the heart, if cracks have a heart, of a crack between two places that do not normally exist. Instead of the question of freedom of free will, if you look at it as being free choice, I'll put it to you again. And let's say that you had such an ability that in some way everybody could be periodically aware right quick that, well, I do have free choice. It's not a question. It's not in doubt. I do. But then what if you realized, which could not be a coeval awareness the way things are now, with believing or seeing that you had a certain kind of free choice. But what if you found out that in every given area there was only one choice, and yet you were free to choose, but you didn't realize that along with this ability to freely choose, you're only given one choice? Although it sounds like it, I'm not simply playing with words. It is in a more complex realm, actually, of physics, of energy. Because it's being able to trick a mechanism. Although trick's not the word, if you saw it from a more complex way, it's be able to make something run off of energy that is actually more than it is. I'll give you a little quick for instance. I'm not saying this is exactly it, but some of you seem close to getting it. What if life needed to send out energy of a certain kind? And it's going through all of its systems, and it's primarily, in part at least right now, needs to be feeding man in a certain way so that man can help it. And let's say that this energy right now is not compatible, is not digestible, is not usable in a pristine form. And so it has to, you understand, trick is not the word, but there is no real word to describe this. It has to rearrange the receptors in humanity to take this energy and to actually use it in a way that they're not really equipped to use it. That is the crack that I was trying to point towards, wherein it might be the possibility that it's not even a matter, it's not even a problem of whether people have the freedom to choose this or that, which would be a form of energy. What if they are led to believe that, which forget beliefs and all the words, they are led to accept and expect a certain kind of energy, and energy is not really what they're led to expect. And it comes in the form of, you have your freedom to choose whatever kind of energy you want. Okay. And then you're not made to see, you're not allowed to see, that of all your choices, they always amount, at the most, to one. Now, ordinary intelligence might say, assuming it followed some of this, that, well, wait a minute, what would be the purpose in that? If you're not going to have but one choice, why go through all the problem to make you think that you have the freedom to choose, then if you're only going to get one choice? Now, see, that's what ordinary intelligence would do, which is, of course, is a brick wall, and I'd be insane to respond to it. But for you people, it should make you go, aha! That the very thing that ordinary intelligence would go, wait a minute, here's proof positive. You just painted your own self in the corner. It's ridiculous. If you're only going to have one choice, why even set up the illusion, the perception in people's intelligence that they've got the freedom to choose if they're only going to be given one choice anything? Anyway, that is absolutely insane. I said it first. Can't accuse me, I said it first. But it should make you go that your ordinary intelligence, I was trying to speak for it, good, everyday, reasonable, sophisticated intelligence would do that and say, well, that's not so. You should go, yeah. And then go, oh. Because there's your explanation that that's crazy. Okay, got that. Does that help? Well, no, I just discount it because it's crazy. What if the very thing that something is not, such as in this case, sane and reasonable, the very thing it's not may be its ideal state? That is why I just described an ordinary intelligence says, well, that's crazy. That's useless. I mean, that's silly. If you're only going to be given one choice, why would life go the problem, the trouble to make you believe that you had freedom of choice? If you're going to have one choice anyway, what the hell does it matter? It's like saying, well, we got prisoners here, POWs, and every day they're going to get turnip soup. And that's all they're going to get. It'll keep them alive. It's either that or nothing, either that or death. So why would we go to the trouble to maybe try and hypnotize them or try and trick them and say, listen, some of you are probably going to think this is turnip soup again tomorrow, but it's not. Why do that? If they got no choice, they're going to have to eat it. Why try to fool with them? You just give them a slop and they're going to eat it, and that's it, right? So why would you go to the trouble to do that? There's your explanation. You understand the basis of what I'm saying, assuming that you were trying to follow some of it. There is the explanation. There is the response, the ordinary reasonable response to what I'm saying. That is, well, that's crazy. Okay, there's your explanation. You've explained it, that it's crazy. I don't have to think about it. If it must be explained, though, that is, you must tell yourself, well, that's crazy. If it must be explained, you'll never understand it. Now, you can say, well, there's nothing to understand. There you are forever. You're not going to move. All right, beyond all that, some of you are looking a little dazed. Some of you out there, especially out in the Midwest on the tape, you're looking a little more dazed, I might say, than usual. I know how hard it is out there in the flatlands, though. Specifically, materially then, are you, here's an area that affects everyone, most people are still interested in, are you free to choose who you will fall in love with if you're wired up to only be attracted to one specific type? You can talk about forever that, in fact, you might note the progress or the movement from older prearranged pagan marriages, family arrangements where you just married off, which is still going on in other time zones of this planet. But you might note a kind of movement from that kind of prearranged marriage up to the chivalrous eras of so-called romantic love, where it seemed to be a freedom of choice insofar as your matrimonious activities. Now that appears to be, and even nowadays, in this part of life's body, that is, this part of the world, ordinary people, ordinarily sophisticated people, would consider prearranged marriages now to be, at the very least, outdated, probably heathenistic, pagan, undemocratic, yucky. But that's just part of being an American or a West European or somebody. You not only have political and economic freedoms to work where you want to, but by God, fall in love and marry anybody you want to. You don't even hear, thank God, we're not under the same kind of class pressures even as our motherland, of most of you, of England. That here, you know, a poor boy can marry a rich girl. But are you free to fall in love? Some of you laughed already before I even went into this, which shows that some of you have already had sneaking suspicions. Are you free to fall in love, as they say, if it turns out that you're wired up to only be attracted to one other wired up type? What kind of freedom is that? Well, yes, you can fall in love with anybody you want to. Except if you notice, a guy's been married 12 times. You can look at a series of pictures of his 12 wives, and they almost look like sisters. Or you can hear people, without knowing it, even give their explanation. That I don't know what's wrong, but I keep marrying losers. Could you be a little more specific? And sometimes they can, without knowing it, that they're attracted over and over to the same type. Is that freedom of choice? I was just trying to find you a good example. And then more, the subject has not changed, even if your mind is. But let me slide into a subparagraph. And a kind of more complex future. It's almost as though somebody doing this kind of stuff, a real explorer, a revolutionist, has got to provide their own free choices. Now, by delving into this subparagraph verbally, I assume that some of you caught on that I am almost suggesting that the idea of free choice under ordinary conditions is somewhat... Maybe we place it somewhere between the pillow of spurious and the doorway over here on the portico of specious. In other words, free choice may be some kind of illusion again. That is, even if you believe, even if you are ready to arm wrestle me, insisting that people have free choice, okay. But remember I said, even if you got that ability, what good is it if it turns out that you only got one choice all the time and you just don't know it? What if you do have free choice? All right, so my hint, if you'll suspend your ordinary belief for a second and follow my sub-paragraph here, my sub-sketch, that maybe it's open to some great further question as to whether people either have free choice or, in fact, if they do, whether there's anything freely to choose from. If indeed we're still not with the one bar of soap, or if indeed Henry Ford has not been running things since time immemorial. That is, you can have any kind of car, any color you want, as long as it's a black T model. But you got every choice in the world. But what if it turns out that every choice, in your particular case, is limited to, I don't have a calculator, but I think it's 1. That's what I was hinting. All right, if that be true, just drift along here with this for a second. If that be true, then I'm suggesting that in a more complex future for somebody attempting to do this, then the person attempting to do this would in some way have to provide their own free choices if they're not extant, if they're not available through ordinary means. And you might look at it thusly. Another social / funny / dash law of physics. And that would be that complexity is a buffer. We're still in the subparagraph, those of you keeping notes. I hadn't changed it. Such as, you recall a few nights back when we were taping, I pointed out this sort of new version of a struggle that you haven't heard the last of that's going on apparently out there in the ordinary world, that is, over the question of whether there is anything really such as mechanical evolution, in that they find more and more proof, just irrefutable proof to large segments of life's academic body, that we have fewer life forms now than we used to have on this planet. And at the time I brought that up as an example, as a springboard, I pointed out the possibility that ordinary intelligence is not wired up and primed to consider, and that is, even though that may be true, which is fine by me for the time being, we won't argue with it, that they cannot see when they have got to look through the kind of three-dimensional diametrically, dualistically opposed operations of the nervous system. And that, all right, we're either evolving and life is getting more complex or it's not. And if we had the proof now that there were many more forms of life, even though there were simpler forms, we had more forms of life, we cannot say now by any means that life is mechanically evolving. It could be going backwards, or else life would not have done away with these other thousands of life forms. And I pointed out that in the pro and con camps, things are not arranged so that there's going to be any large segment, much less one person over any great period of time, be able to go, wait. The premise is faulty, as always. Could it not be the possibility that we have fewer life forms, but in that we now have increasingly complex man, the intellectual creature, that intellectual-man might easily be able to replace 12K simpler forms of life, 100,000 forms of life, 1,000,000 forms of simpler life may be replaced by you, generically speaking, of course, by intellectual man. All right, you're up to speed, right? So that in the physical food chain you might have intellectual man, humanity, thinking humanity, Homo sapiens, might be able to replace hundreds of thousands of simpler forms of life. Now can you see that intellectually too you should be able, that you should be complex enough within your own thinking to be able to buffer yourself, to be able to protect yourself from the kind of internal now, not physical, not in the sense of out there, but the internal kinds of frights, threats, what would seem to be evolutionary dead ends in you, up here, that you're complex enough in there that your own intellect can serve you up new ideas when old ones seem to fail. It is like your own unnatural, your own privately evolved neural backup system. It is almost an extreme excogitation. You to be complex enough in here, which requires that you have got to have been thinking more than you had to. Because you have got to be complex enough now that you could be producing, if this was life forms, if we were back talking to material out there, evolution, that you are now complex enough in here that you have excess ideas to where when the old ones seem to want to jump up and bite you on the ass, that want to threaten you, that let you down, which is always your first stories, the explanations that old intelligence has for you, that you're complex enough now that it's a buffer. You could do away, you could slay, you could extinct many of the old ideas you have and let them go. Let them become as extinct as some of these fossilized, now non-existent life forms. Some of your ideas that seem to be important at the ordinary level could now be dispensed with. But you have got to have a kind of backup. You have got to have now your own evolutionary reserve. That is, you've got to be more complex than is evolutionary necessary now intellectually. Then you're protected. Back to what I said, that complexity is a kind of buffer. It is out here. If humanity now, believe it or not, it can't be seen from ordinary views. But what if man now, rather than being a slow walker, rather than being properly available as a form of, or as an object of criticism, what if humanity, just for a second, what if humanity is actually more complex right now, is more evolved than it needs to be? Of course, we're not going to be silly enough to go tell some ordinary person that, because at best an ordinary person, ordinary intelligence, at best might say, well, now and then humanity just spottily, just here and there almost, is up to where they should be. We all know that in general at the ordinary level of intelligence, humanity is certainly off the mark. Not even up to the starting line, way behind, morally, spiritually, intellectually, and every other way. But what if, just for a second I'm telling you, what if humanity is actually right now more complex than it has to be? It's a safety valve. It's a backup system. I'm suggesting. Beyond suggesting, I'm telling you that if you're going to do such as this, you need to be more complex than is necessary, without them having any reason to look at it this way. What I'm describing now is being complex enough to protect yourself, to be able to serve up new neural energies, ideas, when the old ones begin to fail, when the old ones begin to threaten, when the old ones begin to fall apart, when the old ones make you afraid. For that to happen, for you to be able to do that without them understanding, is really what religion's always talked about, what all the myths talk about of some kind of heroic struggle in life or journey. Is what psychiatry talks about, of being a well person, being able to engage in healthy, productive, non-injurious relationships with others, that your relationships with others would be a win-win game and all of that. They're talking about the same thing. They're saying that you're complex enough that no matter what the ordinary vicissitudes of life seem to be on you, emotionally and intellectually and every other way, that you can take it, and yet you're complex enough that not only you can take it, which everybody can take it, well in the sense that ordinary people that say when something terrible happens, and they go, I can't stand this. With an ordinary person, I don't mean that you shouldn't have any feelings for them, especially their family or something, but when somebody says, I can't stand this, you don't have to run around yourself and get excited, because it's always a win-lose. It's a dichotomous game when they say, I can't stand that, when they just heard this bad news. Well, it's obvious they can either stand it or they can't. If they're telling the truth and they say they can't stand it, well, I guess they're going to die shortly, or just explode, or go away. But just because somebody says, well, I can't stand it, doesn't mean that they can't stand it. But what that you should grasp, I'm talking about somewhere beyond that. For you to be able to stand it is not just to survive it or not survive it. That's not the point. But for you to be able to stand it is to be complex enough that what seems to be an almost fatal body blow to you spiritually, emotionally, intellectually is not so. But if all of your intellectual resources are being used up in responding to what seems to be the bad news, the inexplicable bad luck, that seems to be an almost morbific blow And if it takes all of your old ideas just to respond to it, just to try and keep your equilibrium, just to try and get your breath back, you're not going to survive. You may survive in the sense of the ordinary people, but you cannot survive and grow. You have got to be so complex, at least a little bit more complex than is necessary to either just survive or not survive. You've got to be that complex to be protected. You've got nowhere to fall back on. And ordinary people try and fall back the way life is arranged. Well, I don't understand this, and I can't believe it happened to me. I guess the gods only know. They don't know what to say. It is an explanation. That's life, that's fate. The gods are testing me. It's some kind of bad karma. They got all these stories, all these explanations, right? You got the explanations, but if they must be explained, where do we start tonight? Then you'll never understand it. That is, do those explanations suit you? If they do, I can always ask my question, what in the hell are you doing here? The explanations do not suit, do not explain to some people. They don't explain it to anybody. But there's some people that almost get haughty about it and huffy. Of course, just my luck, I end up with you kind of people as my personal acquaintances. As well, I've heard all the stories and I've studied them, and I'm past the point of being upset by them. I'm just extremely disappointed. And may I underline extreme. Because you have, to varying degrees here and there, realized that things that must be explained, no matter what seems to be the source of explanation. The world's leading authority, here he is on whatever subject, or here she is, the world's leading authority. And you pays your money, you takes your seat, and you go, yes. And they give you an explanation, and all around you, hundreds of thousands of people may be saying, hear, hear, giving a standing ovation, and you listen, and maybe somebody says, why aren't you standing and ovating? And they may say, didn't you understand it? And you think, yes, I understood it completely. I understood exactly what he said. And they look like, well? And you think, well, it doesn't explain a damn thing. I mean, the explanation was just right. He wrapped it all up. And all these other people understood that that was a wrap. That came to a conclusion, and they're delighted. I understood it. I heard him. I heard it get to a period. No doubt about it. The man explained it on the basis of his premise, which might have been a splendid old premise. I heard it. I heard it. He wrapped it up. He put up the problem. He said, all right, all of you wonder what 2 and 2 equals. And he talked for several hours. He had charts. They had some smoke coming out of the floor, and they had some laser lights. And he got to the end, he says, and it's 4. And the people were sorely astounded. People used to be like that. And you can say, well, I heard it all, and he explained it. I understand. He explained it. But I don't understand it. Which is why it was explained that way. Remember? That's part of the purpose of things being explained in the way in which they are, is so that they will not be understood. Hear, hear, yes. Oh. You have got to be complex enough. And note, by now I don't feel like I have to do it all the time, note that I am not in some personal way, me or anybody involved with this, but I seem to be running it, that I'm not offering any kind of specific, when I say you've got to be more complex, I don't say that 2 and 2 is not 4. I never told you what 2 and 2 is. I've told you that anything that is ordinarily explained, you've already been exposed to this, so you don't have to have any kind of faith in the statement. Anything that's ordinarily explained doesn't help you understand. If it does, I got to go back and say, what in the hell are you doing here? It doesn't explain anything, but I'm not presenting. And this kind of activity never presents. I'm not taking credit for doing it. That is, for not doing what I'm saying. That's for doing what I'm not doing. But this kind of activity has never been systematically structured. It can't be. It is not to say, well, everything that you think is wrong, which I can say that everything you think is wrong. But if I did that, then you would take it as a premise like, yeah. That I'm going to say, well, everything you know is wrong, which is a fact. From a more complex view, everything you know is wrong. That is, it is fatally flawed. Everything you know is wrong. But if I said that and made it as a dogmatic statement, what you would hear, what ordinary intelligence hears, is everything you know is wrong, comma. Because you're waiting for me to say, and it's a good thing you found me because I'm going to tell you everything is right. And that is not what this is about. That yes, everything you know is wrong, but to wait and say, well, then tell me everything is not wrong. Oh no. Because anything can be told is wrong. It is equally flawed. For me to say everything you know is wrong, and if you went, well, all right, I like you, I trust you, so therefore I'm going to take everything that I know and I'm going to reverse it, and then that's what I'll believe. Now I have to say, well, wait a minute. I know you're trying real hard, and it's nice of you to have that kind of faith in me, but I got some grungy news for you. Even if you do that, guess what? And you might go, oh no, don't tell me. You mean if I reverse it, then still everything I know is... Don't you see? Don't you see how easy it is? Whereas everyone else is trying to figure it out. Everyone else is trying to hear an explanation. Well, wait a minute, if everything I know is wrong, boy, this is going to get really, really sticky. Well, you could say it gets real, real sticky if you don't have this ability. That you decide to move and you take everything that you wanted, which should be almost nothing, out of your apartment and close the door and get in your car and leave. That's how sticky it is. No, I want to take most of the stuff with me. Well, even the stuff I don't want, I want to take it with me. In other words, in the back seat of your car, and you may only have a front seater. You may be driving an MGB, but in the back seat, what you want is your apartment. It's got to go with you, even the stuff you don't want. That amounts to, in a sense, what explanations are. And I say that which must be explained will never be understood. All right? Those people that must move always live in the same place. Well, I got to get out of here. If you got to get out of here, you look around in the back seat, forever it's going to be that same place. You can move the furniture around, you can get in the car and drive around, but as soon as you stop and have to take a nap, you're going to crawl in the back seat and it's your old apartment. You have got to be able to be so complex that it's almost as though you got a new back seat. You have got to be complex enough that you can be protected. And protected in a sense is not ordinarily perceived, and it's certainly not ordinarily necessary. It wouldn't even be called that ordinarily. But it's all of the stuff, that you think about that disturbs you. It's all the stuff you think about that seems unjust in life. It's all the stuff you think about that seems to give you the intellectual blues. It's anything that is less than fun. Anything that's less than joyful, which is a matter of doing this, that you should be at least growing some, that you're getting younger up here, even if all of this is sagging and drooping and gravity is beginning to pull it. That in here, in the brain, it is not a parallel maturity. It is not a parallel death. If it is, you're not doing it. But to be able to do that, to be able to fight against it internally, you have got to be more complex than is necessary to either take it or not take it. To either stay where you are or to move. And of course take everything with you. You have got to have that kind of complexity in yourself. But I point out one more time before I change the paragraph. Not complexity to suit me, not complexity from some book, not complexity from any source. You can't say, well, how should I be more complex about a specific area? In fact, I think this about such and such. And I trust what you said. It sounds right. I'm going to be more complex. So what kind of complexity should I add to this? Well, I want to get the right ones. How are you going to get the wrong ones? The only wrong one would be, and this is still a kind of illusion, the only wrong one would be if you thought to yourself, all right, I think such and such about this particular area, so I'll be more complex. Whenever I think that about this thing, I'll also try to think of the fact that there's some people who disagree with me. I mean, they're wrong, but there are people who seem to truly believe otherwise. Is that more complex or not? No. That's always there. You just never put it that way before. You might look at it as being a kind of lateral progress, if you had to, that, well, I don't normally even give the other guy an even break. I never even think about the fact that, well, many people disagree with this, fools that they be, but I guess some of them probably mean well. That's not being more complex. The reason I went through that is to tell you that there is no way to tell anybody, to give that kind of energy to another nervous system, to say, all right, I'll believe you. I'll try to be more complex in my thinking. Give me something to make me more complex, or tell me some information that will be more complex. You can't get it from anybody. If it's got to be explained to you, then whatever you get won't explain anything else. You simply have to be more complex. And to say, well, how? That's how. Well, in what way? That way. Well, what if I get more complex and I do it in the wrong way? You can't. You're either more complex or not complex. You either think more about any particular subject or area, you either think more about it than you have to, or you don't. It's that simple. And if you're thinking more about it than you have to, then you become more complex. And it becomes your own buffer. It becomes your own kind of inbred evolutionary protection. That even as you might be able to shed some of the lesser forms of life, in your case lesser forms of thinking, that is ordinary forms of thinking, you replace them by that which is more complex. Whereas humanity itself, thinking humanity, intellectual humanity now may be replacing hundreds of thousands of lesser forms of life, physical life, then your own complex thinking begins to replace hundreds of thousands of lesser forms of intellectual life in you. Just think, to be freed, I never ask anybody to do this because even I draw the line at torturing people, to write down every opinion you have. Well, not even write down what the opinion, but just to number them. For you to think about, and give me the number of opinions you have. Well, let's just call it X. Maybe X thousand, but X. What if you could take all that and just replace them in the same way that I'm telling you, quite hinting to you very specifically, that thinking humanity, this one species, may handily have replaced 100,000 lesser forms of physical life. What if you could replace hundreds of thousands, or hundreds, whatever it is, opinions in you? And now we're talking about intellectual evolution inside of one individual nervous system. That you could replace it if you could produce in a new area more complex intellectual life in you, then you might come up with just, I hate to say one, but one or two or a few, like whole new species of thought that would replace hundreds of thousands of lesser forms. And you don't have to look around at to search for amoebas or protozoas. Opinions. If you want to talk about lesser forms of life, what could be lesser than a goddamned opinion? Now, I know in some circles opinions have a decent reputation, but it's not the kind of circles the revolutionist runs around in. If you want to talk about simple, crude forms of life, what could be simpler than an opinion? It can't survive on its own. It's got to have a conflicting opinion. It's got to be protected all the time. Well, just look. People fight over opinions. People don't fight over complex info. They don't fight over actual new, compact data. Wars, fights, fist fights over opinions. Not over the facts. They don't fight over the fact in a bar that the home team colors of the Oakland A's is blue and gray, or whatever it is. They're not on the floor fighting over that. They're fighting over the fact that one guy said the Oakland A's, pound for pound, are the best team in the American League. Because that's where they still are. And another guy says, you know, don't you wish your Aunt Charlie believed that? And then they end up fighting over what? Their opinion. But not over a fact. Not over a fact that the Oakland A's, whenever they're actually playing on the field, have 9 men on the field. Let's say they're not there fighting over a fact. It's always over opinions. I did all that just in case any of you missed my intended, objective, clinical, cold-blooded assault and insult of opinions when I said if you worry about what it would be a lesser form, a more simplistic form of intellectual life in you, opinions. If you begin to see it, what in you deserves to be extincted? What deserves to go the way of neural dinosaurs? Opinions. Jesus. Just think if you could shake loose from hundreds, maybe thousands of opinions and replace them by a more complex form of life, a more complex form of neural life in you. How about to what ends? To wrap up, how about what is life up to in these old sayings? Been around for years and years and years, and they're still around. They're reuniformed. They say a man that's too smart is often all too sad. Or too much knowledge means too much discomfort. A wise man's heart is seldom joyful. Well, that's enough. You've heard them. But I would wager that every one of you at some time, probably more than once, has read some variation of that and you did not laugh. That you were sitting around, and chances are whenever you ran across that in print, it was in something a little more serious than a Joan Collins novel, that you're already reading a book on philosophy or something non-fiction or an article, and somewhere in there it was pointing out it's normally used rather than just being extracted as an interesting quotation from it by itself, but it would be within the context of them talking about the attempt for an intelligent man or woman to try and think about life, to ponder on the weightiness and the heaviness of the cosmic consequences of being alive and good and evil and all that. And they might say, of course, this is not an easy job, and that's why not many people seem to be called by the muse of philosophy, because it's been noted by thinkers before you and I thousands of years ago that the heart of a wise man is seldom joyful. That too much wisdom brings too much sorrow, and that kind of thing. And you, at the time you read it, I wager that none of you sat there and laughed. You went, yeah. Of course, it's a form within private. It's a nice hobby of telling yourself what kind of guy you are again. That, yeah, I can feel some of that. I can dig where they're coming from. I have been so reflective and insightful all my life that sometimes I feel that I'd been better off. I wish I'd been more like my half brother. Even he's a bricklayer. He dropped out of school at the 8th grade, and he belches and picks his teeth. But the old son of a gun seems happy. He doesn't sit around like me sometimes worrying about where will I go when I die? What happens to the light when the light goes out? You know, he doesn't. I'd probably be better off if I were more like that. I remember there was a purpose for me to bring this up. It wasn't to get a laugh. Was I was saying, what is life up to? That has always been around. As long as people have been writing and recording, somebody's been pointing that out. Somebody's been asking that question. Somebody's been making that statement. And people have been going, yes, 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 and taking it personally. People who would seem to be those actually engaged in the pursuit of knowledge, of thinking, of wisdom. Because it's not the people who are not in that pursuit. It's not them, the bricklayers, to be staying around going, that's true. You know, I think so much I give myself the blues, and I've mucked up my life by being so introspective. No. It's the people who apparently are charged with the interest of pursuing the kind of intellectual life I'm talking about. So what is life up to? The energy behind these observations, that a man who thinks too much is too often sad, or the heart of a wise man is seldom joyful, and all that stuff. The energy behind it refers to still ordinary man, and it's not actually referring to people that really know too much. That's not it. Now at the 3D level, that seems to be, and would seem to be the only people that would, or the people that would seem to be the sources of such quotations would be people who had experienced it. And the people who write such quotations as the heart of a wise man is seldom joyful. It was not a bricklayer who wrote that. It was not a man, was not a garbage collector. It was not someone illiterate. Not that that's right or wrong. But it was somebody who had done that, who believed, I have thought so much that I've put myself in certain kinds of intellectual or emotional or moral quandaries. I seem to run around in a kind of neural roundhouse that my train cannot get off a track or change directions. And so it seems as though I've almost thought so much, me and other people, and the person makes the quote or says it, and many other guys go, yeah, yeah. So you realize I'm not alone, that I have tried to think so much that it's not been a boon to me, that I am actually suffering from it. And that's what happens to people who know too much. Those people don't know too much. Now, at the 3D level, it seems that way. And you and I, if you understand any of this, certainly would not ever point a finger and tell those people you don't know too much. They know just enough. They know enough to say what they said. But what they're referring to is not people who really know too much. If you knew too much, you would know more. You'd know more than that. No matter what their education, their reputation, they have submitted to the ordinary conditions, the ordinary limitations, and they have stopped thinking right where they're supposed to. Now, it may be that they were supposed to have stopped at the point of saying, you can almost think too much. And they seem to be at some kind of cutting edge or further away from the field of the rest of humanity for them to say that. That other parts of life's body can, properly, as there should be impressed by that. That there's some guy over here who seems to be out among the herd, away from them, out there in front of us like an intellectual scout. And he shouts back, yes, I'm out here and I'm trying to think thoughts and I'm trying to examine our sense of morality and right and wrong. And I've thought about it many times while you people are having fun back there. And I've been thinking about it, and I'll go, yeah, you know, we're all in favor of it. Every time we think about you doing that, we're all in favor. Carry on. And he says, yeah, but I'm going to have to tell you. You know, it's not all a bed of roses. You got here and you think so much and try to figure out so I can maybe explain some of this to you. And it will, I hate to say it, now, I don't want your sympathy, but it almost takes some of the fun out of life. I mean, I almost feel like at times I know too much for my own good and it saddens me. And the people go, my. The person does not know too much. And those who may say that, well, I identify with that. I have had touches of the same feeling and experience. None of those people know too much. They know just enough. They have submitted to the local conditions. They have submitted to all explanations, including what seems to be their own. But they do not know too much. To take too much in quotations is actually being something out of the ordinary. Something really out of the ordinary. To know too much would be to know better than all of that. Right? Well, yeah, that almost makes sense, but I don't have time to think about it. The people, even at the ordinary level, that say that, and the people who respond to that, although they think just enough, they have submitted to the limitations, they have stopped right where they're supposed to. If you want a little something more, is they've stopped right there, but it's as though every now and then in the body of life, it lets aromas kind of waft over from a far side of this neural chasm. And it's like they almost suspect that, although they can't say this, but even though they denounce in a way, express regrets of them knowing so much that it almost takes the joy out of their life, in a nonverbal way, some of them almost. An individual's not important, it's just part of life's molecular body. In humans it says this. It's that some of these, it's like they know, I don't really know too much. I may know more than anybody else back here in the herd. I may know more than anybody else at my local conditions right now. But for me saying that I know so much, I know too much for my own good and it's taking away the fun, they almost know that that's not true. What they know is the too much, the real too much, is still somewhere else and I can't get to it. That's what gives you the blues. Because if you actually knew too much, you would not be subject to not being joyful. You would not be subject to being of heavy heart. If you knew too much, you'd know too much. If you knew too much, there would not be a question of whether you were happy about it. Only those who say, well, knowing too much can prove to be an unhappy experience, well, they just don't know too much. Or from a more complex view, of course, they don't know near enough to start with. But at the ordinary level, they know enough to be able to identify what would be too much and say, if you knew too much, like I do, it might give you a heavy heart. But what they're saying is, I know all I can at local conditions, but sometimes it's like I hear the sounds of strangers dancing from the floor above.